Welcome to the Transformational Storyteller Podcast. The stories we tell ourselves and others shape the lives we lead. I'm your host, Dara Lise Lyons. My guest today, Miriam Horrocks-Isenberg, has a phenomenal story of transformation. She actually has a number of stories of transformation because this is a woman who has been through so many life events that have really changed and shaped her narrative and have enabled her to help a whole host of people through her example and her inspiration. And I'm not going to tell you too much about her story, but I know that you will be moved and inspired by it, just as I was. So thank you so much, Miriam, for being here, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about your experiences of transformation.
So I'm standing in my kitchen, and I'm rushing around trying to get the stew in the crock pot that we're having for dinner that night, when I look up at the clock and I realize I am already 10 minutes late, the story of my life, late, to go pick up my kids from middle school. It's 2007. I jump into my car, I whiz out of the driveway, and as I'm flying down the road, out of the corner of my eye, I see an unmarked police car. And I know that before I even look in my rearview mirror, I know what's going to be there. And sure enough, when I look behind me, I see the blue whirling lights. I pull over immediately and roll down my window as I'm preparing my papers, and I glance back into my rearview mirror and I notice that the police officer is just staring at the back of my car, sitting in his car. I check my watch and I can literally almost hear my kids complaining from school about mom being late. When the police officer finally emerges from his car, which seems to take forever, he comes to my window. I hand him all of my information and say to him, I'm so sorry. I know I was speeding. I'm late to pick up my kids. I'll try to be more careful. And he takes all of my information. He doesn't say a word. And he walks away from me, and I'm disheartened. I'm definitely getting a ticket. And all of a sudden, the police officer stops at the rear of my car, and he's looking at the back of my car. And he doesn't go back to his car. He comes to my window again. So the police officer comes to my window and he says to me, I have a hobby of trying to figure out what people's license plate means. And for the life of me, I can't figure out what yours means. Now my license plate on it says ISN RKS1. I look at the police officer and I said, well, it's a really long story. I don't know if you want to hear it. And he smiled at me and he said, well, if it's a good enough story, it might get you out of this ticket today. So I took a deep breath and I said, I was married to a man named Michael Horrocks. He was an amazing man. And on September 11th, he was taken from us. 3 years later, I was blessed in meeting a man named Paul Isenberg. He was widowed with 2 small children. We married and blended the family. So Michael and I had 2 children, and Paul and Nicole had 2 children, so now we had 4 children. And one day while we're sitting at dinner, the kids were laughing because nobody at school knew what to call us. Were we the Isenberg family? Were we the Horrocks family? Was I Mrs. Isenberg or Mrs. Horrocks? What we decided was that we would come up with one of those names like Brad Pitt and Angelina, the Brangelina type thing. And we decided to call ourselves the Isenrocks. So for Christmas, on that first year after we got married, my husband presented me, Paul, with this license plate that said Isenrocks 1. When I looked up at the police officer, after telling this story, I noticed he was crying. And he said to me, you know, Miriam, I was there that day for your husband's funeral. I was one of the police officers that was assigned to make sure that everything stayed calm that day for you and your family. I remember seeing you and your children get out of the car, and I prayed for you that day. Pulling you over today is like an answer to my prayer. At that point, I'm doing what I'm doing right now, and I was sobbing. He laughed and he said, I can't give you a ticket now, but I am going to make you promise 2 things. I want you to promise me to slow down because you now have 4 kids, not 2. And I want you to promise to never stop telling your story because other people need to hear it.
As you know, if you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast on video, I believe that stories have the power to transform lives, and so does Loving Healing Press, one of our show sponsors. They have an amazing selection of books, audiobooks, all centered around love and healing and utilizing fictional stories and utilizing nonfiction techniques and self-help innovations and interventions to be able to really help people to live out the narratives that they want to live. And so if you want to take advantage of a 15% off discount on any Loving Healing Press book or product, you can go to www.lhpress.com and use the coupon code DARALEASE15 for 15% off at checkout. Miriam, thank you so much for being here. I'm so awed and inspired by your story, and I'm really, really grateful that you're here to tell it.
Thank you for having me. I feel called to tell this story and share this story and help others. Yeah. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I'm so glad you got pulled over. I'm so glad you got pulled over.
That was just one of a string of events, because I actually didn't start speaking right then, but I started to share my story more openly with people. Yeah. And as I began to share it more openly with other people, I became more confident in my story, and I felt like my message kind of emerged from within.
Yes.
So that I didn't, when it was time to really get up in front of groups of people and share my message, I knew exactly what I wanted that message to be.
Yeah. When you said that you feel called to tell this, to tell your story, to tell your experiences, and I just feel like there is such a hunger for people who have gone through any sort of trial or tribulation to understand that doesn't need to be the end of things. And I think that's one of the things that I take from your story, is that, that there is beauty to be found even amongst devastation. So I was hoping you could maybe speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. Every day we face defining moments, and everyone's defining moments are different. My defining moments are different than yours, but there is a commonality in all of them. And that one commonality, I believe, is a gift.
Yeah.
That when you're standing at the edge of something painful or hard or difficult or challenging, that within that there is a gift, and that gift is choice. And too many people find themselves at the effect of what the world has given them. And, on September 11th, the entire country was at the effect of what had been done to us collectively, as a group.
Yes.
And individually, to me and to my children. And I had to digest that. And at some point, and it wasn't a one moment thing, it was a long journey to get to a place where I said, do I want to remain at the effect of what has just happened to me? Or do I want to step into a place of what I call limitless potential? A place where there are no limits on the joy and happiness and peace that we can have in our lives. All too often we limit what we see and how we feel because of what's happened to us.
Right.
And I have learned that you don't need to do that.
Well, there are some people who, they were in similar circumstances to you. They lost someone on September 11th and their life shut down after that. And so what do you think it is within you that allowed you to dig deep and to salvage, and not just salvage, but like you've actually created an amazing life for yourself while still honoring your husband and not sort of just cutting off from that. So what was it in you that allowed you to do that?
That's such an easy question to answer. It was my faith.
Yeah.
There is nothing, and it is the number one life lesson that I talk about. I talk about 5 life lessons when I speak. The first life lesson is trust your higher power.
Well, did you have that trust before September 11th? Did it strengthen after? Because what was your faith like before this happened?
I was raised in a faith, and I tell everyone, this is my faith.
Right.
Your relationship with your higher power is your relationship.
Yeah.
You have to define what that is, and you have to define who that is with and what that's going to look like. I believe in Jesus Christ. I was raised in a Catholic household,
yeah.
and we practiced our faith. So I had a basis or a foundation, and I was able to then take that and really develop a deep relationship with Jesus Christ, because that's who was there for me.
Right.
Really,
right.
in the quietest, stillest, most painful moment, he was there.
And I mean, I'm sorry about the painful moments. I love that you are reminding people that that relationship can be there and the pain can exist simultaneously, and you can go to whoever someone's higher power is with that pain. Because I think sometimes people have, myself in the past included, I've had this relationship with a higher power that was so conditional. Like, okay, well, yeah, I believe in a God if everything's turning out my way, if I'm getting what I want, if things are going well, and then, having the rug pulled out from under you and feeling like everything is lost. I think it's easy to abandon that relationship, but it doesn't have to be that way. And in fact, I think those are the moments when it makes sense to lean into that relationship.
That's exactly right. When to really, turn it over and just say, hey, I can't do this right now, and I really need your help. I need you. And when you can get to that place where you recognize that you're limited,
yes,
and there's somebody out there who can help you, they do. He does, and he does it through people. And that's a story that I share when I speak, is about a project that was started at my house and not completed. And one morning I woke up and there was a group of people outside. And whenever my sister had asked me about the project, when was it going to get done, I would say to her, I'm going to put it in God's hands for a number of reasons. And I don't want to spill too much, because it is one of the stories that I share. But in that moment is when I realized, I need to trust God more often.
Yes.
I need to rely on him to help me.
Yeah, to help you. And also the work that you are doing, I believe, is God speaking through you. The fact that you're able to help others and talk to other people and lean on, your example to really communicate a powerful message of what they can achieve in their lives if they develop their own relationship.
Absolutely. It has been my consistent prayer.
Yes.
From the day that I lost Michael through last night. And that prayer is, if this horrible atrocity happened in our world and in my life personally, how can you help me, God, to use that to create goodness? Yes. Because really the only way that you combat evil and hatred is through love and kindness.
Yes, yes. Well, if it's not too painful, I really want to kind of have you talk a little bit about what it was like for you on September 11th, what it was like immediately afterwards, because I know that I've experienced a certain amount of tragedy in my life, but it's always been things that I could expect, right? Like someone was dying for a long period of time and then they passed. Like I never experienced a sudden sort of loss like the one that you've experienced. And I think most people have not. And so how do you cope with something like that, and what was it like?
So it was devastating.
Yeah.
And there really, sometimes I hate to say this, but there really are no words to explain what it feels like.
Yes.
I try not to focus too much on what that particular day and moment felt like.
Yes.
But instead on taking that moment and shining a light on it to project it forward. Right. So in the pain and the suffering and the loss, I was devoted to my husband for 12 years. We loved each other. We were inseparable. We did everything together. We had these 2 beautiful children. We had this loving marriage. I knew the day I met him, I wanted to marry him.
Wow.
So when you lose that all in one moment, there is no way to convey that.
Right. Well, and I would imagine, I mean, the fact though that you had this incredibly loving, connected relationship, that you have had and have 2 beautiful children that came from that, like, I would imagine that was a source of, like, a real lasting legacy of love.
And it still is. It's the one thing that I tell anyone who is suffering from the loss of a loved one. And the one thing that I say is, and it's biblical, love never dies.
Yeah.
There is, and again, I speak to it in terms of limitless potential,
yes.
right? So our ability to love is limitless. Our higher power doesn't say, oh, you can only love one person.
Right.
Well, if you only loved one person, what if you have 10 kids?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So one of the most profound things my daughter said to me, I'm remarried, and one of the most profound things that my daughter said to me, she was 12 when we got remarried. And I said, are you okay with this? I want to make sure you know that I still love Dad. Yeah. Like, that's not going anywhere.
Yes,
that love is not going anywhere. And Krista said, Mom, you loved me, and you had Mick, and you love Mick. You don't love Mick more than me, and you don't love me more than Mick.
Yeah.
You love us both. You love us differently. And I was like, God, you're 12.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's so
That's
profound.
who she was. And it was just there's room in your heart to love as many people as you want to love. Yeah. And you love them appropriately for the role that they have. Michael had a role in my life, and he will always have a role in my life.
Yeah.
But he's not here to share my life with me.
Right.
In a way that you're sitting next to me on the sofa.
Yes.
He's very much a part of my life. Yeah. But Paul is here, my husband now, and shares a role in my life that is different than the role that Michael shares. But I love them both.
Well, and that, I mean, I love that. And I've also found that when I'm open to love generates more love. So if I have a loving relationship with a friend or a family member or whatever, not only does it not take away from my love for them to love someone else, but it adds to it. It's like muscles or something. The bigger my heart can grow, the more love I have to sort of extend in that way. Yeah. Well, and then, in terms of the speaking that you do, you're like, Michael is not the beginning and end of your story, right? You also have been through another very deep experience that I'll let you share about.
Yes, and that experience was really the experience that propelled me to do what I need to do. I think I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it happened on the day of our youngest daughter's graduation.
Oh my gosh.
It was kind of when I found out. And at that moment, I realized life is short.
Yes.
And if I'm going to get this message out, I need to get this message out. Yeah. And it goes along with one of my principles that I talk about, one of my 5, which is say yes.
Okay.
And the reason that I say yes is when you say no, you once again put yourself in the box and limit your potential for growth. But when you are able to sit back and say, I'm just going to say yes. Yeah. So I said yes to a lot of things that year that I was diagnosed, and I went through I went through 6 rounds of chemotherapy.
Oh my gosh, wow.
But during that year that I was going through all that, I started this business. We sold our home, moved into a new home. I went back to school. So
Wow.
I started a new job shortly after the next year. So it just kind of was this big now or never, let's get this thing started.
Yeah.
So, and during that time, I was able to put into action the 5 principles that I learned
Yes.
after losing Michael. And those 5 principles are: trust your higher power,
Yep.
honor your values, not your fears, release resentment,
Okay, yes.
stay present, and say yes.
Oh my
And
gosh, I love that.
if you really learn them,
Yes.
and then I say love them, which means in any loving relationship, it's give and take, right? You think about a marriage or a friendship that's lasting and long.
Yes.
It hasn't been perfect.
Oh, of course
There
not.
have been ups and downs. But you're devoted to it.
Yeah.
You're entrenched in it.
Yep.
And you're going to do anything to make it work. And that's the way you have to be with these 5 principles. You have to be passionate about them. You
Yes.
have to be devoted to practicing them.
Yes.
You can't just say, oh yeah, I learned them, they're good.
Well, and I love that you say practicing them, right? Because it's one thing to know yes, but it's another thing to say it and then follow through on that.
Well,
yes.
right. And,
Yeah.
and one of the things as we were blending our families, when you're raising 4 children and you've had tragedy to these 2 and tragedy to these 2, to be able to say yes to let your kids do is really, really hard. To be able to let go of that control and allow them to take ownership of their own lives, and to say yes to them when maybe it's not going to be work out the best. It's difficult. So during those times to really practice that, as well as honoring our values and not our fears, and staying present in each moment, and really trusting our higher power. Those were all things that I got very good at.
Yes.
And Paul, I think, grew a great deal during that time of being able to implement those things in our family and in our marriage, to be able to make sure that we lived them. We really lived them, so that when I was diagnosed with cancer, it was like cancer.
Yeah.
I didn't fear it because I honored my value on courage and faith.
Wow.
And I wasn't angry at it. I didn't resent it because it was a disease and I had it.
Yeah.
And I was going to get better or I wasn't, and I was going to do everything I could to get better, but I wasn't going to waste any time staying present of the present, focused on what could happen. Because when we project to what could happen, or when we project ourselves out of a painful situation to a better time, we're not present.
Well, and it reminds me so much of the serenity prayer, right? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Like, if you're trying to change the things that you cannot change, and like, then all the possibilities, you talk about unlimited possibilities, all the possibilities, you become completely closed off from them, right? Whereas when it's, okay, I'm going to accept this is this thing, I'm dealing with it, where do I have some capacity for expansion, to say yes, to, do things. I mean, I feel like you're really talking about putting that into action. Like, your life to me feels almost like an enaction of a prayer.
Well, thank you. That's a compliment. But it is, if you think about that prayer is all about staying present.
Yes.
Right? Don't ruminate over the past. How many people have been able to time travel and go back and change what they did?
Oh, yeah.
You can learn from it.
Right.
And you can make sure that you don't do it again. But you can't change the past. So don't live there. And don't project yourself to the future, because you don't know what could happen. Tomorrow is promised to no one. Yeah. So when you become so focused on the future, you're not present. But when you're present, and sometimes you're present in pain. Yeah. I was present in pain for a long time. But because I was present in pain for a long time, I can now be present in joy. Yes. In unlimited amounts. Yeah. So that's what's very important, is to just be where you are and feel what you need to feel in order to get over the hump or
Yes.
to really appreciate what you're going through. I appreciated every day with a cancer diagnosis. The cancer diagnosis was the coolest thing because I was able to say, wow, this is what it feels like to be this in touch with your body.
You know what? I've never heard anybody say, and I probably will never hear anybody say again, the cancer diagnosis was the coolest thing. Like, I just love that you're able to really sit here and own that it's like, yes, I did have this cancer diagnosis. And also at the same time, I felt, inside my skin, inside my experience. And I was able then to know that life is short. I do have a limited amount of time, or unlimited potential, but a limited amount of time. And so I'm going to take advantage of it. I'm going to do the things that I hadn't maybe been saying yes to before.
Yeah. And it's the lens that we look at life through. Yeah. Are we looking at the life through the lens of, oh, poor me, I am a victim of cancer. Oh, poor me, I am a victim of losing my husband. Oh, poor me, I am a victim of whatever people, loss of job, infidelity in a marriage. There are so many things that people fall victim to. Is that the lens you're going to look at life through?
Right.
Or are you going to look at life through the lens of, yes, I've been through that thing, but what is the gift in it?
Yes.
What is the gift in a cancer diagnosis? Yeah. And there are always gifts in everything. You have to look at it through that lens. Yeah. And that's the lens we try to, as a family.
Right, look through. Well, and I love though that you talked about being present to what is, because I don't feel you doing like some sort of spiritual bypass, right? Where it's just like, okay, I'm just going to ignore all the things that are going on in life. It's like, no, I am in the trenches of my life. I am feeling what needs to be felt, and there is a gift. And I'm going to repurpose that. It's almost like, I like repurposed furniture and stuff, and like cool, funky, vintage things. And I feel like that's part of what you do, right? It's like, okay, there's this thing and it might be wreckage in the moment, but how is it salvageable? And then how can I improve upon this and build upon it and create something beautiful? Yeah,
right. That's what it's all about. And think about it. Think about a time when you were in pain, whether it's physical pain, you hurt yourself, or emotional pain. Think about that pain and think about how wonderful it was to not have that pain anymore. How beautiful it is to get to the other side of that pain.
Yes.
If you never felt the pain, could you ever feel the beauty?
Right, and I mean, that's why I complain about the seasons, like in the dead of winter as I'm shoveling out, I'm like, why don't I live in Florida? But I know why I personally don't, is because I don't have the type of personality that can appreciate sunshine every single day if I don't sometimes have rain or snow or whatever. Like I personally need gradations in emotion and experiences to be able to really show up and seize the moment. Yeah. So speaking of moment seized, I want to ask you, how did you make that transition to doing the speaking work that you're doing? What was that like? And tell me about the first time that you started speaking.
So what happened, I decided, really, Paul was a huge facilitator for me in this. And I became a certified professional coach.
Okay.
And I started my master's degree in pastoral counseling. I have not completed. I put that on hold right now because I have so much going on. But I started that. And I started this journey of what is the best way for me to reach the most amount of people and have the biggest impact.
Yes. Okay.
And we were invited to speak at Malvern Retreat House.
Okay.
And Paul and I spoke together, and something just happened. And I turned to him in the car and I said, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then I interviewed, I had started a job, and during my interview process with the company I'm with right now, which is Medical Solutions Supplier.
Okay.
They're a DME company, they're wonderful,
Yep.
very supportive of me.
Yes.
I decided, during the interview, I was talking with the CEO, and I told him about my dream to speak. And not only did they offer me the job, But he said to me, I would love for you to tell your story at our sales conference as a keynote speaker.
Oh my gosh.
So I did. And when I did, the feedback and the response that I got was so great that I started to reach out to other people, and things have started to snowball.
Yes.
And Paul is a huge proponent of getting me out there and really encouraging, because he believes wholeheartedly in my message. And so that's how it, and it's really been word of mouth. I haven't done a lot of advertising or anything like that. So it's been slow and steady.
Well, I have to tell you, so I heard about you and got connected through one of my yoga clients who is just, he's phenomenal. And he told me about your story, and he said, I saw this woman speak. She was incredible. And he's like, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, and it was so inspiring, and it was, life-changing. And I thought, well, okay, I need to meet this person, because, he tells me your story, and it's like, it's devastating on a certain level, right? If you just look at the events, and I'm thinking like, okay, yeah, I get how there wouldn't be a dry eye in the house. But then to have him say, and I was so touched, moved, and inspired, like, this woman's story has the potential to change lives. She impacted everyone in the audience in a profound way. Like, I just felt like, oh my God, that is a redemptive and transformational experience. And so it's amazing what you're doing, and how you're using the pain of the past to really talk about living an empowered existence now.
And when we started speaking, you talked about why I felt called. That's why. Yeah. It's not me.
Yes.
It's God working through me.
Yeah.
And that is really what it's all about. It's about connecting to the God within, and finding the message and the purpose that he or she has for us, and putting it out there to the universe, because it's the only way to heal what's happening in our world today.
Yes. So you mentioned being a coach. You mentioned, that you speak in groups. Like, how is, let's say someone's watching, let's say they're listening, and they're like, oh my God, this woman is amazing, which I'm sure they will feel that way. Like, do you work with people individually? Can they come see you? Like, are you available to be booked to go and speak at places? Like, tell us, how do people get connected with you?
Sure. Currently, right now, I am doing primarily keynote speaking for groups and companies. And you can reach me at Miriam, M-I-R-I-A-M, at isenrockstalks.com. The name of my business is from the story at the beginning. And so that is the best way they can get a hold of me. I do have a website. It is under some transition right now.
Yes.
So
they'll just get in touch with you that way then. Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad that you brought it back to Eisen Rocks, because I was thinking about just like the symbolic significance, right, of taking all these experiences and creating something pretty friggin' phenomenal. and I feel like you've been able to really do that. And of the 5 principles that you mentioned, which, by the way, I'm so glad that you mentioned them, because I was like, oh, she's going to make us go to one of her talks to find out the 5 principles. No. But I love that you've said them. So I want you to.
The coolest thing about the 5 principles are the stories that go with them.
Okay.
So
people have to. But so I'd love for you to say the 5 principles again, and just like if you could maybe say something about like which one you find like maybe people struggle the most with, or like if you have any sort of suggestions for how people can work with one, just like give us a little snippet of something that we can do to embody them
So the
better.
5 are trust your higher power, and I think we talked about that one a lot. Honor your values, not your fears.
Yes.
Release resentment. That's the one I'm going to talk about. Yeah. Stay present and say yes. So release resentment that's probably, I would say it's definitely the most difficult. I shouldn't say that. Everybody's individual and they all struggle.
It's the most difficult for me. So I want you to speak to the releasing resentment, because I struggle with that for sure.
So one of the things that I found that the kids and I went through after losing Michael was that we were exhausted all the time, exhausted. And it felt as though we were carrying a giant backpack filled with bricks. And every day we would get through our life, we would work, we would go to school, we would go to soccer practice, and we would come home and just be exhausted. And it began to wear on you. I mean, think about a time when you're tired, right?
Oh yeah.
And you begin to become short, and you're curt, and you can't see the goodness, and you live very much at the effect of what happened to you.
Yes.
And I had an experience where this became very apparent to me, that my backpack was filled with something.
Yeah.
And it was filled with anger and resentment and hatred.
Yes.
And envy.
Yeah.
And I unleashed all of that on someone.
Yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't say it was it's a story that I tell.
Yeah.
Someone was talking about something that was really good that happened to her, and complaining about the airlines and how she had to wait in lines, and how there was delay in her, and it almost ruined her honeymoon. And I overheard the conversation.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was carrying this huge backpack with all of these things packed in it.
Yeah.
And I basically went over to her and said, did you get home safely from your honeymoon?
Yeah.
Did your husband get home safely?
Yeah.
Well, on September 11th, there were no lines. There was no TSA. And as a result, I'm raising 2 kids by myself.
Yeah.
And that was unfair to her. It was unfair of me to do that to her. She was just sharing an experience.
Right.
And what I walked away from that experience later was, I needed to put this backpack down. Because if I didn't put it down, I was going to walk around miserable.
Well, it was dragging you down. And
I was filling up. 2 things that I learned. One was that when I put the backpack down, I was able to allow my kids to put theirs down.
Yeah.
And I also stopped putting crap in other people's backpacks.
Yes.
Like the whole heap of guilt that I stuck in hers. And so the important thing about resentment is that it's going to happen.
Yes.
Right? You're going to have people who do things wrong, cut you off in traffic, or an infidelity in a marriage. People are going to hurt you, and you are going to get angry.
Yes.
And you are going to feel envy, and you are going to feel resentment, and even hatred.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you want to stay there, or do you want to put it down?
Well, yeah.
And putting it down doesn't mean that it's resolved. That's a process, right? Forgiveness is a process. But setting it down in order to allow yourself the time to respond to it and not react to it.
Well, if it's like, to use your metaphor of the backpack, if you've ever carried something really, really heavy, which I have before, and and then you take it off or you put it down or whatever, and then you're left with that feeling afterwards of like, oh my gosh, I threw my back out because I was carrying this backpack. Yeah. There's still healing that has to happen afterwards. Absolutely. But it can't happen while you're still carrying that backpack.
And initially, when you set that backpack down, it is like just this relief, I don't have to carry that. Yeah. And you don't, and people choose to carry it.
Yeah.
And that's and I chose to carry it.
Yes.
And I chose to pick it up sometimes too, and then chose to set it back down.
Yes.
So that's the whole point of this, is that in everything, in that defining moment, there is choice.
Yes.
And there is choice with our backpack. Yeah. And so I would say, choose to set it down and examine it if you need to.
Right. Well, and that the choice to set it down doesn't mean that people who wronged you or whatever, you're not saying what they did was right, you're not saying what they did was good, you're saying that
no judgment.
Yes, that I am not willing to carry this anymore because it's too heavy and burdensome for me, so I'm going to put it down.
Right.
It has nothing to do with whether or not that person.
I could not.
Yes.
Right. So I talk a lot about. I don't present about it, but my husband Paul and I talk a lot about judgment, and when you judge anything, it's a nice day, it's a lousy day, that's a decision and a choice that you're making.
Yes, yes.
It doesn't have to be a nice day or a lousy day just because the sun is out. Some people love the rain,
Right,
And that could be a wonderful day. So choosing to just stand in non-judgment will help you release your backpack. You know, to sit there and say, if I, and I've done this in audiences, ask people to raise their hand if they felt as though the terrorists were bad people.
Yeah.
And every hand goes up. It's not my job to judge them.
Right.
What they did had an impact that was overwhelmingly horrible.
Yeah.
And affected thousands and thousands of people.
Yes.
Not my job to judge.
Right. Which I think people might, listening to that or hearing that might feel like, but of course, but it was horrible, but it was this, but it was that. And at the same time, I feel like for me, you saying it's not my job to judge there's also such relief in that, like in such a...
What is my judgment going to do to better my life?
Right.
So if I walk around and say, they're bad, they're evil, this is horrible, they should be blah, blah, blah. How does that provide relief to me?
Yeah.
But to be able to trust my higher power, to say judgment is yours, not mine.
Yes.
And to believe that judgment is someone else's, not mine.
Right.
Allows me to say, I don't know if I necessarily forgive them, right?
Right.
But I am able to set the backpack down and say, I'm not going to stand in judgment.
Well, to me, that feels more accessible than forgiveness, actually, because I know people will say, oh, you have to forgive everybody for everything, and I'm like, I don't know. But to just say, you know what, I'm not going to even pose the question to myself. Like, I'm going to kind of exit from that role of judge, because forgiveness is like someone did something wrong. I'm going to let them off the hook for the wrong thing that they did, which to me feels harder, actually, than saying, you know what, I'm not going to judge.
Forgiveness for something like that should not be given. It should not be given, I don't think, overnight.
No.
It's a process. It's a process that you come to. When I started to learn more about not those specific terrorists, but when I began to learn about the culture of terrorism, and the way these people are raised, was there a choice for them?
I mean, it's horrible. Yeah, learning that it's horrible, and at the same time, as you said, their actions had devastating consequences, but judgment isn't going to help. It's not going to help you. It's not going to help that. It's not going to do anything. So I'm so grateful that you're speaking to that. And I'm so grateful that you are getting out a message of what are your choices to people? Because until you said that about putting the backpack down, it dawned on me that some people, I don't even think they see that as a badge of honor at their backpack. Like, they don't even realize that it is a choice. They just think the only choices are to kind of figure out how to drag it behind
I was there,
them.
so I completely understand that. I carried my, badge until one day I realized, I don't want to be the 9/11 widow anymore. That I don't want that one moment to define, which is why I don't speak about 9/11 a whole lot. That's not who I am. It's an experience that I had. My marriage with Michael and the way that he touched my life makes me more who I am than how he passed. And I want to honor Michael's life and the way he lived it. And Michael lived in love and kindness. That's how he lived. He didn't live in hatred and anger, and he just didn't. It wasn't his MO. So, how do I honor his life? And honoring his life is not carrying the backpack. Honoring his life is living this gift that we have, and living it to the best of our ability in loving kindness, peace, faith, hope.
Yes. Well, and I mean, there's just so much that I feel touched by in your life and in your message. And I guess if you had, I ask everybody this, but like if you could say, because I think that every story has like a message or a theme or a motto or whatever, and I guess I'm just curious, like, what would you say the message, the legacy of your life, like what is the message that you want to touch people with in terms of your own life?
I think the message really is just that there are no dress rehearsals. This is it. So if you are going to live a life that's meaningful, don't wait till Saturday to start.
Yeah.
Do it right now.
Yes.
Go out right now, create your own happiness. Start with your happiness, start with what's meaningful and authentic to you.
Yes.
And then all the success and reward will happen later.
Right.
Because when you can really start in today,
Yes.
and pursue what it is that's meaningful and purposeful to you,
Yes.
all the barriers come down.
Yeah.
And life becomes a limitless adventure, a limitless journey of all the things that you want.
Yes, yes. Well, and all the success, all the things will happen later, but they'll also happen in this present moment, because if you're doing the things that light you up inside, it almost doesn't matter. Like, yeah, it'd be nice to have great, end results from that, but for me, people seek the end result so they can feel good. But if they're feeling good, that's
it happens.
Yeah,
right.
yes,
Right. I actually
yes,
just
yes.
saw a great podcast on that.
Did
There was
you?
a great podcast,
yeah.
yeah. And he was the person who was delivering the podcast, and I can't remember his name right now, but he was talking about find the happiness first, then everything else will happen. Yeah. If we always set bars and agendas for ourselves, and we once we get to that agenda, we're never happy with where we are. We always want more. And that's because we're always seeking success. Seek happiness.
Yeah, which is so much more. I mean, you talked about choice, like I can't choose all the external events, right? But I can choose how I show up in this moment, if I'm living in accordance with my values, if I'm saying yes to the opportunities. So
staying present.
If I'm staying present,
Yep.
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 Oh gosh. Well, thank you so much. Again, I want to just reiterate so that people know how to get in contact with you if they want to book you for a keynote speech, or
Yes.
maybe try their hardest to convince you to do some personal coaching or whatever it is. So just tell again, how people can link up with you.
Miriam at eisenrockstalks.com.
Yep.
And if you Google me, Miriam Horrocks-Isenberg, you'll find me.
Okay, wonderful. And we'll definitely put it in the show notes. And just thank you again for being with me today. Oh my gosh, I feel so touched and inspired, and I'm like, I'm excited to live in this day and to just like really carry some of the lessons that you spoke about, because I feel like they are so transformational.
I challenge everyone, pick one, just pick one, and really commit to it. Commit to it, put everything you have into it, practice it, hone it, develop it, get angry at it sometimes. And then once you feel like you really love this, it becomes part of who you are and you really actively begin to live it. Then you can move on to another one.
Well, and to me, they're kind of interconnected though, right? So it's like a domino. I feel like if you're really living in faith, then you're gonna have to say yes. If you're really being present to the moment, then resentment you can't carry that backpack because the thing you're resentful about isn't in that moment. So they seem very interrelated to me.
They are.
But yeah, thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Yes, so much. So a big thanks to Kismet Cowork for allowing us to film today in one of their 3 locations. Kismet Cowork is a phenomenal place to work. I can speak to that because I work at their Chestnut Hill location, but they also have offices in Spring Arts and in Manayunk, Philadelphia, and they're even going to expand beyond that. But if you are looking to work in a community of amazing people in a co-working space where you can either bring your corporate offices and have multiple employees working here, or you can just work here as an individual who maybe doesn't want to stay at home and work in their pajamas, which is what I was doing prior to joining Go to www.kismetcowork.com. They have generously offered 15% off to any new member on their first month if you just mention me or mention this podcast. So again, that's www.kismetcowork.com, and I hope to see you around. I would love to be able to work alongside you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Transformational Storyteller Podcast. As always, thanks to our episode sponsors, our production team at Rebel Hill Consulting, and of course, many thanks to you, the listener. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you're creating stories that empower you and inspire others.